My name is Sarah Chen, and I thought I knew exactly where my career was headed. At 28, I'd been working as a marketing coordinator at Pinnacle Digital Solutions in downtown Seattle for 3 years. The rain was pattering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our modern office building as I sat in the conference room, my heart racing with anticipation. The conference room smelled like fresh coffee and the lavender air freshener our office manager insisted on using. I'd arrived 10 minutes early, wearing my best navy blazer and the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for good luck. My portfolio was spread out on the mahogany table. 3 years of successful campaigns, client testimonials, and my recently completed MBA certificate. "Sarah, we appreciate your interest in the senior marketing manager position," said Jennifer Walsh, our HR director. Her perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the mahogany table as she avoided making eye contact. She was wearing her usual black pantsuit, the one she always wore for serious meetings, and her expression was carefully neutral. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been preparing for this promotion for months, staying late to perfect campaigns, volunteering for every challenging project, and even completing my MBA through night classes just last year. My hands trembled slightly as I placed them flat on the table, trying to maintain my composure. "However, we've decided to go with someone who has more extensive experience in strategic planning," Jennifer continued, her voice taking on that artificial sympathetic tone that HR professionals seem to master. I felt my stomach drop. This couldn't be happening. Just last week, Marcus Thompson, my direct supervisor, had complimented my quarterly report and mentioned how impressed the executive team had been with my innovative approaches to client retention. "I understand," I managed to say, though inside I was screaming. "Could you provide specific feedback on areas where I could improve?" Jennifer exchanged a quick glance with Marcus, a man in his 50s who'd always seemed supportive of my work. He was fidgeting with his Mont Blanc pen, the one he claimed was his lucky charm. But today, it seemed more like a nervous habit. "Well, Sarah, it's not that your work isn't good. It's just that this role requires someone who can think more strategically about long-term market positioning," Jennifer said, her words feeling rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech in the mirror. But I had been thinking strategically. Just last month, my campaign for our biggest client, Cascade Technology Solutions, had increased their engagement by 47% and brought in 3 new enterprise clients. I'd presented a comprehensive 5-year growth plan that included market expansion into the Pacific Northwest's emerging tech corridors, complete with budget projections and risk assessments. The executive team had praised it as forward-thinking and exactly the kind of innovative approach we need. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Sarah, you're incredibly talented, and we value your contributions immensely. This decision doesn't reflect your abilities or your future potential here at Pinnacle." "Then what does it reflect?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Another uncomfortable silence filled the room. Through the glass walls, I could see my colleagues at their desks, going about their normal Tuesday morning routines, completely unaware that my professional world was crumbling just 20 feet away. "Sometimes these decisions come down to fit," Jennifer said finally. "The senior role requires someone who can interface with C-level executives at major corporations. We need someone who's comfortable in those high-stakes environments." The implication stung. I'd successfully presented to the CEO of Morrison Industries just 3 months ago, saving a $2.3 million account that was on the verge of walking away. I'd handled crisis communications for Ocean View Restaurants when their flagship location had a kitchen fire, managing media relations and customer communications so effectively that their sales actually increased in the quarter following the incident. As I walked back to my cubicle, the familiar sounds of the office, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the coffee machine gurgling in the break room, felt muffled, like I was underwater. The Seattle skyline stretched out beyond the windows, gray clouds hanging low over Puget Sound, matching my mood perfectly. The Space Needle looked particularly lonely against the overcast sky. My cubicle felt smaller than usual as I sank into my ergonomic chair. The motivational poster I'd hung up last year, "Success is where preparation and opportunity meet," now seemed mockingly optimistic. My desktop was cluttered with the remnants of my confidence, printouts of successful campaign metrics, thank you notes from satisfied clients, and a photo from the company retreat where I'd won the Innovation Award for my social media integration strategy. My colleague and closest friend at work, David Kim, looked up from his computer as I approached. His concerned expression told me he could read the disappointment written all over my face. David had been at Pinnacle for 5 years, working his way up from intern to senior coordinator, and he had an uncanny ability to read the office politics. "They said no, didn't they?" he asked quietly, rolling his chair closer to the partition that separated our workspaces. His desk was, as always, meticulously organized, with his collection of vintage marketing books stacked perfectly, and his small, succulent plant thriving under the LED desk lamp. I nodded, feeling tears threaten to spill over. "They said I need more strategic experience. David, you know my work better than anyone. Am I really not ready for this?" David was one of the most honest people I knew, sometimes brutally so. He'd been the one to tell me when my first campaign pitch was too ambitious, and he'd also been the one to encourage me to apply for the senior position in the first place. If anyone would tell me the truth about my capabilities, it would be him. "Sarah, that's complete bullshit," he said, lowering his voice, but not hiding his frustration. "You've been doing senior-level work for the past year at least. Remember the Morrison Industries account? You single-handedly saved that relationship when their previous manager completely botched their rebranding campaign." The memory was bittersweet now. I'd worked 18-hour days for 2 weeks straight, coordinating with designers, copywriters, and the client's team to create a campaign that not only met their tight deadline, but exceeded their expectations. The client had specifically requested to work with me on future projects, and their CEO had personally called Marcus to praise my exceptional strategic thinking and execution. "Then why didn't I get the promotion?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but something doesn't smell right about this whole thing," David said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Have you noticed who else applied for the position?" I hadn't really thought about it. Internal job postings were usually kept confidential until after the decision was made, partly to avoid office politics and partly to protect people's feelings if they weren't selected. "No. Do you know something?" "Not exactly, but I heard through the grapevine that they were considering external candidates too. Michelle in accounting mentioned seeing some unfamiliar faces in the building last week, and they all looked very professional, like they were interviewing for something important." The thought made my stomach churn. It wasn't uncommon for companies to post jobs internally as a formality while already having an external candidate selected, but I'd always trusted that Pinnacle operated more ethically than that. The company prided itself on promoting from within and fostering a culture of growth and development. I spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on my current projects, but my mind kept wandering. I was supposed to be working on a social media campaign for Pike Place Bistro, a local restaurant chain looking to expand their digital presence, but every time I opened the creative brief, I found myself staring at the words without comprehending them. Around noon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. Seattle's Pioneer Square was just a few blocks from our office, and I often went there when I needed to think. The historic neighborhood, with its Victorian architecture and cobblestone streets, usually helped me gain perspective on work problems. As I walked down First Avenue, dodging puddles and breathing in the crisp Pacific Northwest air, I tried to make sense of what had happened. The feedback they'd given me was vague and contradictory to everything I'd heard about my performance over the past year. My last review had been glowing, with Marcus specifically noting my strategic mindset and leadership potential. I stopped at my favorite coffee cart, run by an elderly man named Giuseppe, who made the best espresso in the area. He'd been there for 15 years, he'd told me once, and he knew most of his regular customers by their drink preferences. "The usual, Sarah?" he asked, already reaching for the medium cup. "You look like you could use an extra shot today." "Make it a double," I said, grateful for his perceptive kindness. As I sipped my cappuccino and watched the lunchtime crowd hurry past, I made a mental list of my accomplishments over the past year. The Morrison Industries save, the Ocean View crisis management, the Cascade Technology campaign that had exceeded all projections, the Innovation Award, my MBA completion, the quarterly reports that had consistently shown positive ROI on every campaign I'd managed. None of it made sense. If I wasn't qualified for the senior position, then either I was completely delusional about my abilities or something else was going on. The afternoon dragged by painfully. I tried to focus on my Pike Place Bistro campaign, developing a social media strategy that would highlight their farm-to-table philosophy and local sourcing, but my heart wasn't in it. Every time I looked at the empty office where the new senior marketing manager would sit, I felt a fresh wave of disappointment. Around 3 o'clock, Jennifer Walsh walked past my desk, her heels clicking authoritatively on the polished concrete floor. She glanced in my direction and gave me a brief, professional smile, the same smile she gave everyone, which somehow made it feel even more impersonal. "Sarah," she said, stopping by my cubicle, "I hope you know that today's decision doesn't reflect your value to this company. We see great things in your future here." Her words felt hollow, like something from a corporate training manual on how to handle disappointed employees. I managed a polite smile and thanked her, but inside, I was screaming. As 5:30 approached and the office began to empty out, I found myself staring at the Seattle skyline again. The late afternoon light was filtering through the clouds, casting long shadows across Elliott Bay. Ferries were crossing the water, carrying commuters home to Bainbridge Island and Vashon Island, and I envied their sense of direction and purpose. "You should head home," David said, appearing beside my desk with his jacket already on. His messenger bag was slung over his shoulder, and he had that look of someone ready to escape the workday. Sitting here brooding isn't going to change anything. He was right, but going home to my small Capitol Hill apartment didn't feel appealing either. I'd probably just end up ordering Thai food from my favorite place on Pine Street and watching Netflix while replaying the rejection meeting in my head. "Maybe I should start looking for other opportunities," I said, finally voicing the thought that had been nagging at me all afternoon. "Don't make any hasty decisions," David advised, his expression serious. "You love this company, and despite what happened today, you're valued here. Sometimes these things just don't work out the way we expect them to." As I gathered my things and prepared to leave, I noticed Jennifer Walsh's office light was still on. Through her glass door, I could see her on the phone, gesturing animatedly. Her conversation looked intense, and I wondered if it was about the position I'd been rejected for. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt longer than usual. As the floors ticked by, 15, 14, 13, I found myself questioning everything. Had I been deluding myself about my abilities? Was I really not ready for more responsibility? Had I misinterpreted the positive feedback I'd been receiving? My Honda Civic felt like a sanctuary as I settled into the driver's seat. The familiar scent of the vanilla air freshener I'd hung from the rearview mirror was comforting, and for the first time all day, I felt like I could breathe normally. I sat there for a moment, watching other employees hurry to their cars through the rain, everyone eager to escape the workday. As I drove through downtown Seattle, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement like scattered diamonds, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this setback define me. If Pinnacle didn't recognize my potential, maybe it was time to start exploring other options. But first, I needed to understand what had really happened in that conference room. The rejection felt personal in a way that professional disappointments usually didn't. There was something in Jennifer's tone, in the way Marcus had avoided looking at me directly, in the vague and contradictory feedback they'd given me that suggested there was more to this story than they were telling me. My apartment in Capitol Hill felt particularly cozy that evening. I decorated it with artwork from local Seattle artists and plants that thrived in the Pacific Northwest's low-light conditions. My small balcony overlooked a tree-lined street, and I could hear the distant sounds of the neighborhood. Music from bars, conversations from sidewalk cafes, the occasional bus rumbling down Pine Street. I poured myself a glass of the Pinot Noir I'd been saving for a celebration. Ironically, I'd bought it expecting to toast my promotion, and sat on my couch with my laptop. Maybe it was time to update my LinkedIn profile and see what else was out there. But as I stared at the blank job search page, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important about what had happened today. The pieces didn't fit together the way they should, and every instinct I'd developed over 3 years in marketing told me there was more to this story. Little did I know that my suspicions were about to be confirmed in the most shocking way possible. 3 days had passed since the rejection, and I was still struggling to focus on my work. The Seattle weather had turned even gloomier, with a persistent drizzle that seemed to seep into everything: my clothes, my mood, my motivation. I'd spent the weekend updating my LinkedIn profile and browsing job postings on Indeed and Glassdoor, but my heart wasn't really in it. Friday evening, I'd met my college roommate Amanda for drinks at Cannon in Capitol Hill, hoping that a night out would help me process what had happened. Amanda worked as a software engineer at Amazon, and she'd always been good at helping me see situations from different angles. It just doesn't add up, I'd told her over artisanal cocktails, the bar's jazz music providing a sophisticated backdrop to our conversation. Everything they told me contradicts what I've heard about my performance for the past year. Maybe that's your answer right there, Amanda had said, stirring her old-fashioned thoughtfully. When something doesn't make sense, there's usually information you don't have. Her words had stuck with me through the weekend, and by Monday morning, I was more determined than ever to understand what had really happened. It was Tuesday morning, and I was arriving at the office earlier than usual, around 7:30, hoping to get caught up on some projects without the usual distractions. The Pinnacle building was still relatively quiet, with only a few early birds scattered throughout the floors. The security guard, an older gentleman named Frank who'd worked in the building for over a decade, greeted me with his usual cheerful, "Good morning, Sarah." The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt peaceful, and I found myself almost enjoying the solitude. Sometimes the office felt overwhelming with its constant buzz of activity, and these quiet morning moments reminded me why I'd initially fallen in love with working here. As I settled into my workstation and powered up my computer, I noticed that IT had apparently done some system maintenance over the weekend. There was a notification about email system updates and something about temporarily shared access protocols during the transition period. Our IT department was notoriously cautious about system changes, often implementing new protocols gradually to avoid disrupting workflow. I opened my email client, expecting to see the usual Monday morning flood of messages, client updates, internal memos, and the weekly newsletter from our marketing automation platform. But something strange happened. Instead of my normal inbox, I was looking at what appeared to be a shared folder structure I'd never seen before. The interface looked different, more administrative, with folders labeled with various department names and what appeared to be confidential categories. There were folders for HR administrative, finance internal, executive communications, and several others that made my stomach flutter with nervous curiosity. My first instinct was to close out and log back in properly, assuming this was some kind of technical glitch. Our IT department had been upgrading systems all year, and these kinds of temporary access issues weren't uncommon during transition periods. But as I was about to click away, one folder name caught my attention and made my heart skip a beat. HR, Confidential, Hiring 2024. I knew I shouldn't look. Every professional instinct, every ethics training session I'd ever attended, every conversation about workplace boundaries told me to report the access error to IT and move on with my day. But the folder name was staring at me, practically glowing on my screen. And after the strange rejection I'd received just 3 days ago, my curiosity was stronger than my professional caution. With my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, I clicked on the folder. Inside were dozens of subfolders, meticulously organized by month and department. The structure was impressively detailed. January, sales positions. February, technical hires. March, administrative roles. I scrolled down until I found what I was both hoping for and dreading. April, marketing, senior manager position. This was it, the digital paper trail of the hiring process for the job I'd been rejected for. I glanced around the office nervously. The early morning quiet that had seemed so peaceful just moments ago now felt ominous, like I was doing something forbidden in a sacred space. David wouldn't arrive for another hour, and most of the early arrivals were in departments on different floors. With trembling fingers, I opened the folder. The first few documents were routine. The job posting I'd seen on the internal portal, interview schedules with names I didn't recognize, and candidate evaluation forms with sections for technical skills, cultural fit, and long-term potential. Everything looked standard and professional. But as I dug deeper, clicking through subfolder after subfolder, I found something that made my blood run cold. There was an email thread between Jennifer Walsh and Marcus Thompson, dated 2 weeks before my interview. The subject line read, "External candidate for Senior Marketing Manager, confidential, do not forward." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse as I opened the first email. "Marcus," Jennifer had written, "I found an excellent external candidate for the senior marketing position. Rebecca Martinez comes highly recommended from her previous role at Thompson & Associates downtown. She has exactly the kind of fresh perspective we need to take our digital marketing efforts to the next level. I know we have some strong internal candidates, particularly Sarah Chen, but I think we need to seriously consider bringing in outside talent for this level of position. New blood, new ideas, you know? I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over again. They had identified an external candidate before they'd even started the internal interview process, but it got worse. Marcus's response was even more shocking. I agree that Rebecca looks promising on paper, and her portfolio is impressive. Sarah is technically qualified and has done excellent work for us, but she might be too comfortable with our current processes. Sometimes it's better to bring in someone who will challenge the status quo and push us in new directions. How do we handle the internal candidates sensitively? We don't want to create morale issues. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Too comfortable with our current processes? I'd been the one pushing for innovation, suggesting new platforms, proposing creative strategies that had consistently exceeded client expectation. Jennifer's follow-up made my stomach drop even further. We'll go through the motions of interviewing the internal candidates as required by company policy, but let's make sure we position this as a growth opportunity for them rather than a rejection. Sarah is valuable to the team, and we don't want to lose her over this. She's proven she can handle complex accounts and tight deadlines, but she's not quite what we're looking for at the senior level. We need someone with more agency experience and a broader strategic perspective. Go through the motions. The phrase echoed in my head like a death knell. My interview had been a sham from the very beginning, but the worst was yet to come. As I continued reading, scrolling through what felt like a digital betrayal, I found an email that made my hands shake with a combination of anger and heartbreak. It was from Rebecca Martinez to Jennifer Walsh, sent just one day after my rejection interview. Jennifer, thank you for the wonderful opportunity to join Pinnacle Digital Solutions. I'm excited to accept the Senior Marketing Manager position and look forward to starting next Monday. I appreciate your flexibility with my salary requirements. The $85,000 base plus quarterly performance bonuses and the comprehensive benefits package is exactly what I was hoping for. I'm particularly excited about the budget authority and the opportunity to work directly with the executive team on strategic initiatives. $85,000. I was currently making $58,000, and I'd been prepared to negotiate for something in the low 70s. They were paying their predetermined external candidate nearly 50% more than I was making, with bonuses I'd never even been offered and responsibilities I'd been told I wasn't ready for. The final email in the thread was the one that broke my heart completely. It was from Marcus to Jennifer, sent the morning after my interview. Sarah took the news well, all things considered. I think she bought our explanation about needing more strategic experience. She's a team player, so she'll probably stay and continue doing excellent work at her current level. We really dodged a bullet there. She would have been difficult to replace in her current role, and finding someone with her client management skills and institutional knowledge would have been a nightmare. Plus, at her current salary, she's an incredible value for the company. I sat back in my chair, feeling like I'd been physically assaulted. They hadn't just rejected me for a legitimate reason. They had manipulated me, lied to me, and then congratulated themselves on keeping me in my lower-paying position where I was apparently too valuable to promote, but not valuable enough to compensate fairly. The rain outside seemed to intensify, drumming against the windows with increasing force, matching the storm of emotions raging inside me. Anger, hurt, betrayal, humiliation. They all swirled together into something I'd never felt before. I'd trusted these people. I'd worked overtime without complaint, sacrificed weekends and evenings, missed family gatherings and social events, and poured my heart into this company, believing that loyalty and hard work would be rewarded. Instead, I'd been played like a complete fool. I quickly took screenshots of the most damaging emails, my hands shaking as I navigated the interface. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with this information, but I knew I needed evidence of what had happened. Each screenshot felt like collecting pieces of a puzzle that revealed a picture I'd never wanted to see. As I was saving the final screenshot to my personal cloud storage, I heard the familiar ding of the elevator, announcing the arrival of more employees. panic shot through me as I realized I was still accessing confidential HR files. I quickly closed all the windows and returned to my normal email inbox, my heart pounding so hard I was sure anyone nearby would be able to hear it echoing through the quiet office. I spent the next 20 minutes trying to look busy while my mind raced. I opened my Pike Place Bistro campaign files and pretended to review creative assets, but the words and images might as well have been written in a foreign language. All I could think about were those emails, those casual discussions of my professional fate, those calculated decisions about my worth and my future. David arrived about an hour later than usual, apologizing for Seattle traffic as he hung up his rain jacket. "Morning, Sarah. You're here early? How are you feeling about everything?" I looked at him, this friend who had been nothing but supportive, and felt the weight of what I'd discovered. "David, can I ask you something, and will you promise to be completely honest with me?" His expression immediately became serious, his usual morning cheerfulness replaced by concern. "Of course. What's going on? You look like you haven't slept. Have you heard anything about who got the senior marketing position? Any rumors? Any gossip? Anything at all?" David glanced around and lowered his voice, instinctively understanding that this was a sensitive conversation. "Actually, yeah. I heard they hired someone from outside the company. Michelle from accounting mentioned seeing a new woman in the building yesterday, getting the tour from Jennifer. Apparently, she's starting Monday. Why? What's this about?" The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd already seen the evidence. "What else did you hear?" "Not much. Just that she's coming from some big agency downtown, and she's supposed to have a lot of experience with digital transformation projects and enterprise client management." He paused, studying my face carefully. "Sarah, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's really going on here?" I wanted to tell him everything, to share the burden of what I'd learned, but something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of being caught accessing confidential information, or maybe it was the realization that sharing this knowledge would make it real in a way I wasn't ready to face, or maybe it was the professional instinct that told me I needed to be strategic about how I handled this information. "Nothing specific," I lied, hating myself for the deception. I just had a feeling there was more to the story than they told me. "Well, whatever happened, you know you're incredibly talented, right? If they can't see that, it's their loss." His words were meant to be comforting, but they felt hollow in light of what I now knew. It wasn't that they couldn't see my talent. They could see it perfectly well. They just valued it more in my current, underpaid position than they did in the role I'd applied for. The rest of the day passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I attended meetings, responded to emails, and worked on campaign materials, but every interaction felt surreal. When Marcus complimented my work on a client presentation, I wondered if he was just trying to keep me happy in my valuable current position. When Jennifer Walsh walked past my desk and smiled her usual professional smile, I wanted to scream. By the end of the day, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to stay in a company that viewed me as too valuable to promote, but not valuable enough to treat honestly. But I also wasn't going to do anything rash or emotional. I needed a plan. The weekend gave me time to think, really think, about what I wanted to do with the information I'd discovered. I spent Saturday morning at my favorite coffee shop in Capitol Hill, a cozy place called Grind Coffee that served the best cortado in the neighborhood and had become my unofficial office for personal projects. The atmosphere was perfect for reflection: exposed brick walls, local artwork, and the gentle hum of conversation that provided just enough ambient noise to help me focus. I'd brought my laptop and a legal pad, determined to approach this situation strategically rather than emotionally. The evidence was clear. I'd been deceived, manipulated, and treated unfairly. But I also knew that accessing confidential HR files, even accidentally, put me in a potentially vulnerable position, legally and professionally. I'd spent Friday evening researching employment law in Washington state, diving deep into resources about deceptive hiring practices and potential discrimination. What I learned was both encouraging and sobering. While Washington is an at-will employment state, meaning employers can terminate employees for almost any reason, there are still protections against fraudulent hiring practices and workplace deception. The fact that they'd conducted a sham interview process while already having selected an external candidate could potentially constitute fraud, especially since they'd wasted my time and emotional energy on what they knew was a meaningless exercise. More importantly, Their documented strategy of keeping me in my current role specifically because I was valuable and difficult to replace, while simultaneously denying me advancement opportunities, could be seen as a form of workplace manipulation. But more than legal action, I wanted something else. I wanted them to know that I knew. I wanted to look Jennifer Walsh and Marcus Thompson in the eye and let them understand that their deception hadn't gone unnoticed. I wanted them to feel the discomfort of being caught in their lie. By Sunday evening, I had a plan that felt both bold and professionally sound. I would confront them directly, armed with specific knowledge of their internal communications, and give them the opportunity to make things right. If they were willing to acknowledge their mistakes and take concrete steps to address the situation, we could potentially move forward productively. If not, I'd be prepared to take the information to higher levels within the company or explore external options. Monday morning, I arrived at the office with a new sense of purpose. I'd spent Sunday evening polishing my resume and had already submitted applications to 3 competing firms, including Morrison Industries, the client whose account I'd saved. Their marketing director, Patricia Collins, had reached out to me on LinkedIn just 2 months ago, mentioning that they were always looking for talented people and that they'd been impressed with my work on their account. I'd also reached out to my network, sending carefully worded messages to former colleagues and industry contacts, letting them know I was exploring new opportunities for career growth. The responses had been overwhelmingly positive, with several people mentioning open positions at their companies and expressing interest in my background. David noticed the change in my demeanor immediately as I settled into my workstation. "You seem different today," he observed, rolling his chair closer to our shared partition. "More focused? Determined?" "I've had some time to think about my career path," I said, which was entirely true. "Sometimes rejection is just redirection, right? That's the spirit. You know, I heard Patricia Collins from Morrison Industries was asking about you last week. Apparently, she mentioned to someone in business development that they'd love to poach you if you were ever looking for a change." The information was perfectly timed, giving me additional confidence as I prepared for the confrontation I'd been planning all weekend. Around 10 o'clock, I saw my opportunity. Jennifer Walsh was in her office, visible through her glass door, reviewing what looked like personnel files. Marcus was in a meeting with the creative team in the main conference room, which meant he'd be occupied for at least another 30 minutes. It was the perfect time for a private conversation. I walked over to Jennifer's door and knocked, my heart pounding, but my resolve steady. "Sarah, come in," she said, looking up from her computer with that same professional smile I'd grown to see as completely artificial. "How are you feeling? I know last week was disappointing, but I hope you understand that these decisions are never personal." I sat down across from her desk, noting the carefully arranged family photos, the motivational plaques about leadership and teamwork, and the fresh flowers that were replaced every Monday. Everything about her office projected an image of caring, supportive leadership, which made what I was about to do feel even more necessary. "Actually, Jennifer, that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. I've been reflecting on the feedback you gave me about needing more strategic experience and not being ready for senior-level responsibilities. I'm glad to hear that. Growth mindset is so important in our industry, and I've always admired your willingness to take feedback constructively." "Absolutely. And in the spirit of growth and learning, I was wondering if you could be more specific about what strategic experience I'm lacking. For instance, when I developed the 5-year growth plan for the Morrison Industries account, complete with market analysis and competitive positioning strategies, what elements were missing that would have made that more strategically sound?" I watched her carefully as I spoke, noting the slight shift in her posture, the way her fingers began drumming against her desk, the same nervous habit I'd noticed during my rejection meeting. "Well, Sarah, it's not about any specific project. It's more about overall strategic thinking, the ability to see the bigger picture and understand how marketing initiatives fit into broader business objectives." "I see. And would that bigger picture include things like long-term market positioning and trend forecasting? Because my MBA thesis was actually focused on predictive marketing analytics in the Pacific Northwest tech sector. Or are you thinking more about budget management and resource allocation? Because I've been managing campaign budgets of up to $200,000 for the past 18 months. Jennifer's smile became more forced, and I could see her trying to figure out where this line of questioning was going. "Sarah, where is this going? I thought we'd already discussed this thoroughly." this was it, the moment I'd been building toward all weekend. Jennifer, I'm just trying to understand why you felt I wasn't ready for a senior position that pays $85,000 a year plus quarterly performance bonuses, when you told me it was about strategic experience, but then hired Rebecca Martinez from Thompson & Associates without even giving me a chance to address those concerns. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her hand froze mid-drumbeat on the desk, and for several seconds, the only sound in her office was the gentle hum of the air conditioning system. "I'm not sure what you're implying," she began, her voice noticeably higher than usual. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Rebecca Martinez was hired for the senior marketing manager position at $85,000 plus performance bonuses. The decision to hire her was made at least 2 weeks before you interviewed internal candidates. And you and Marcus specifically discussed how to handle internal candidates sensitively, so as not to lose valuable employees who are apparently too valuable to promote, but not valuable enough to compensate fairly. Jennifer's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, and I could practically see her mind racing, trying to figure out how I could possibly know what I knew. The confident HR executive who had delivered my rejection just days ago was nowhere to be seen. "Sarah, I don't know where you're getting this information, but it's accurate, isn't it?" I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "Everything I just said is true. You went through the motions of interviewing me as required by company policy, but you'd already decided to hire an external candidate. You congratulated yourselves on keeping me in my current role because I'm an incredible value for the company at my current salary." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her options. Deny everything and hope I was bluffing? Acknowledge the truth and try to manage the damage? Call security and claim I was making baseless accusations? Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Even if some of what you're saying is accurate, hiring decisions are complex. There are many factors that go into these choices that employees don't always see or understand. I'm sure there are. But honesty should be one of them, don't you think? And so should fairness and respect for employees who have given their best effort to this company. Jennifer stood up abruptly, her professional composure cracking like ice under pressure. "Sarah, I think this conversation has gone far enough. If you have concerns about the hiring process, you're welcome to file a complaint with HR." I almost laughed at the absurdity of that suggestion. "You are HR, Jennifer." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside her office, I could hear the normal sounds of the workplace continuing. Phones ringing, conversations about weekend plans, keyboards clicking as people worked on their Monday morning tasks. But inside this glass-walled space, the tension was suffocating. "What do you want, Sarah?" Jennifer finally asked, sinking back into her chair, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself all weekend. What did I want? An apology? The promotion I'd been denied? Revenge? Money? Public acknowledgement of their deception? "I want honesty," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I want to be treated with the respect that 3 years of excellent work should have earned me. And I want to understand why you thought lying to me was better than telling me the truth." Jennifer looked older than she had just moments before, the carefully applied makeup unable to hide the stress lines around her eyes. "Sarah, you have to understand, these decisions aren't made lightly. We had to consider what was best for the company, for the team, for everyone involved. And what was best was lying to me. We weren't trying to hurt you. We thought it would be easier if you believed it was about experience rather than..." She trailed off, realizing she'd said too much. "Rather than what, Jennifer? Rather than the fact that you'd already decided to hire someone else? Rather than the fact that you thought I was too valuable in my current role to promote? Rather than the fact that you congratulated yourselves on manipulating me into staying?" The words hung in the air between us, like an accusation that couldn't be taken back. Jennifer looked like she wanted to be anywhere else in the world, her usual confidence completely shattered. "How did you find out?" she asked quietly, her professional mask finally slipping completely. "Does it matter? The point is that I know, and now we both have to decide what we're going to do about it." At that moment, Marcus appeared at Jennifer's door, his face flushed from hurrying. "Jennifer, are you ready for the..." "Oh, Sarah, I didn't realize you were here." "Perfect timing, Marcus," I said, turning to face him with a calmness that surprised even me. Jennifer and I were just discussing the senior marketing manager position and how the hiring process worked. The look that passed between Jennifer and Marcus told me everything I needed to know. It was the look of two people who had been caught red-handed and were trying to figure out how much damage control they needed to do. Marcus stepped into the office and closed the door behind him, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by something more cautious and calculating. "Sarah," he said carefully, "I hope you understand that all hiring decisions are made with the best interests of the team in mind." "Your team or the company's team?" I asked, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were more interested in keeping me in my current role than in recognizing my potential for growth. Marcus sat down in the chair next to me, his expression serious. He was wearing his lucky Mont Blanc pen in his shirt pocket, and I noticed his hands were slightly trembling, a detail that gave me confidence that my approach was working. "What exactly do you know, Sarah?" he asked directly, apparently deciding that beating around the bush wasn't going to work. I looked at both of them. These people I'd trusted, these people I'd worked hard for, these people who had made decisions about my professional future while discussing me like I was a piece of office equipment to be managed rather than a human being with aspirations and feelings. "I know enough," I said simply. "I know that Rebecca Martinez was your preferred candidate before you ever interviewed me. I know that my interview was a formality required by company policy. I know that you discussed keeping me happy in my current role because I'm an incredible value at my current salary. I know that you congratulated yourselves on handling the internal candidates sensitively to avoid morale issues. And I know that while you were telling me I needed more strategic experience, you were offering someone else $85,000 plus bonuses for the same role." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Through the glass walls of Jennifer's office, I could see David at his desk, probably wondering why I'd been in this meeting for so long. Other colleagues were going about their normal routines, completely unaware of the confrontation happening just feet away from them. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice heavy with resignation. "Sarah, I want you to know that we never intended for you to feel deceived or undervalued. You're absolutely right that the process wasn't handled as transparently as it should have been. It was the closest thing to an admission of guilt I was likely to get from him. And honestly, it felt good to hear it acknowledged out loud." Jennifer nodded reluctantly, looking like she was participating in her own professional funeral. "We made some poor decisions about how to handle the situation. We were trying to avoid hurting your feelings, but clearly, we ended up doing exactly that in a much worse way. You were trying to avoid losing a valuable employee who was willing to work for significantly less money than you were paying your external hire," I corrected, not willing to let them reframe their motivations as altruistic. "Let's at least be honest about what really happened here." Marcus winced at my directness, but he didn't deny it. "You're right. We should have been upfront with you from the beginning about our intentions and our reasoning." I leaned back in my chair, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders for the first time in days. The confrontation I'd been dreading all weekend was actually happening, and it wasn't as terrifying as I'd imagined. If anything, I felt empowered by their obvious discomfort and their inability to justify their actions. "So where do we go from here?" I asked, my voice steady and professional. "Because I have to tell you, my trust in this company and in both of you has been fundamentally shaken. I came here 3 years ago, believing that hard work and loyalty would be rewarded with honesty and opportunity. Instead, I discover that you view me as too valuable to promote, but not valuable enough to treat with basic respect." Jennifer and Marcus exchanged another look, and I could see them having a silent conversation with their eyes, trying to figure out how to salvage a situation that had already spiraled far beyond their control. "What would it take to rebuild that trust, Sarah?" Jennifer asked finally, her voice cautious. "Within reason, of course." I'd been prepared for this question, had spent hours over the weekend thinking about what would constitute a fair resolution to this situation. "First, I want a formal written apology acknowledging that the hiring process was handled inappropriately and deceptively. Second, I want to be automatically considered for the next senior-level opening that comes up, with a transparent process and fair consideration. Third, I want a salary adjustment that reflects the value you apparently place on keeping me in my current role." "What kind of salary adjustment are we talking about?" Marcus asked carefully, his financial instincts clearly kicking in. "I'm currently making $58,000, Rebecca Martinez is making $85,000 for a position I was told I wasn't qualified for, despite having the same qualifications and 3 years of institutional knowledge. I think $75,000 is a reasonable compromise, especially considering that you've admitted I'm valuable enough that you were worried about losing me. I watched them process this information, seeing the mental calculations happening behind their eyes. It was a substantial increase, nearly 30%, but not unreasonable given the circumstances and my qualifications. More importantly, it was a concrete acknowledgement of my worth to the company that went beyond empty promises about future opportunities. That's a substantial increase, Jennifer said slowly, though I could tell she was already considering how to make it work within her budget. It's substantially less than you're paying my replacement, I pointed out, and it comes with the understanding that I'll continue to do the excellent work you've come to depend on, while also having clearer career development opportunities moving forward. Marcus leaned forward, his expression more businesslike now that we were talking about concrete terms. Sarah, assuming we could make something like this work, we'd need your assurance that this conversation stays between the three of us. The details of hiring decisions and salary information are confidential for good reasons. I'd expected this condition, and I'd already decided how to respond. I'm not interested in gossiping about this or creating drama in the workplace, but I also won't pretend that everything is fine if it's not. If you meet my conditions and follow through on your commitments, then there's nothing for me to discuss with anyone else. And if we can't meet your conditions? Jennifer asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Then I'll be exploring other opportunities, and I'll have to consider whether this information should be shared with people who can ensure this doesn't happen to other employees. The threat was subtle but clear. I wasn't looking to destroy the company or ruin anyone's career, but I also wasn't going to let this behavior continue unchecked if they weren't willing to make things right. The negotiation that followed was surprisingly straightforward, perhaps because they realized they had very little leverage in the situation. Within an hour, we'd worked out the details. A salary increase to $75,000 effective immediately, a formal letter acknowledging that the hiring process should have been handled differently, and a commitment to include me in the candidate pool for the next appropriate senior-level opening. More importantly, we established a quarterly check-in process where I would meet with both Jennifer and Marcus to discuss my career development and get specific feedback on skills or experiences I needed to build. They would also provide me with a professional development budget to attend industry conferences and training programs. I want to be clear about something, I said as we finalized the details. This isn't just about money or title. It's about being treated as a professional who deserves honesty and respect. I've given this company 3 years of my best work, and I expect that dedication to be reciprocated. Understood, Marcus said. And for the first time since I'd walked into Jennifer's office, his expression seemed genuinely contrite rather than just worried about damage control. As I walked back to my desk, I felt like I was seeing the office with completely new eyes. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter, the conversation seemed more animated, and even the persistent Seattle drizzle visible through the windows looked refreshing rather than depressing. David looked up as I approached, his expression curious and slightly concerned. Long meeting with Jennifer and Marcus? Everything okay? Actually, yes, I said, settling into my chair with what felt like the first genuine smile I'd had in days. We worked through some misunderstandings about my career development and compensation. I think things are going to be very different moving forward. Different how? He asked, clearly intrigued by my changed demeanor. I couldn't share the specific details, but I could share my renewed sense of optimism and self-worth. Let's just say, I'm feeling more valued and more optimistic about my future here. Sometimes you have to advocate for yourself in ways you never expected. Good for you, David said, grinning. You've seemed different lately, more confident, more assertive. It suits you. His observation was more accurate than he knew. The experience of confronting Jennifer and Marcus had taught me something important about my own capabilities and worth. I'd always been good at advocating for clients and projects, but I'd never applied that same energy and strategy to advocating for myself. Over the next few weeks, the changes became apparent in small but meaningful ways that transformed my entire work experience. Jennifer followed through on her commitment to include me in strategic planning meetings I'd never been invited to before. Sessions where department heads discussed quarterly goals, budget allocations, and long-term company vision. For the first time, I felt like I was seeing the bigger picture that everyone had insisted I needed to understand. Marcus began copying me on email threads with senior leadership that gave me insight into client relationships, competitive analysis, and market positioning strategies that I'd previously only heard about secondhand. He also started asking my opinion on campaign strategies for accounts I wasn't directly managing, treating my input as valuable rather than just politely listening and moving on. The salary increase made an immediate and tangible difference in my life. I was able to move from my small Capitol Hill apartment to a larger place in Queen Anne with a partial view of the Space Needle and Elliott Bay. The new apartment had hardwood floors, updated appliances, and enough space for a proper home office where I could work on freelance projects and professional development. Small luxuries that had been out of reach became possible, buying organic groceries without checking prices, occasionally treating myself to dinner at nice restaurants like Canlis or the Walrus and the Carpenter, and even starting a small investment account for the first time. But more than the financial benefits, the salary increase represented something psychological, concrete acknowledgement of my value. When Rebecca Martinez started the following Monday, I watched the introduction process with a mixture of curiosity and residual resentment. She was indeed impressive, articulate, experienced, and genuinely enthusiastic about the challenges ahead. Jennifer introduced me to her as one of our most valuable team members, whose expertise and institutional knowledge will be crucial to your success here. The introduction felt different from what I'd expected. Instead of the awkwardness I'd anticipated, I found myself genuinely interested in learning from Rebecca's experience at Thompson & Associates. She'd worked on campaigns for major tech companies, managed teams of 15 people, and had a sophisticated understanding of marketing automation and customer journey mapping that complemented my strengths in client relationships and creative strategy. "Sarah, I've heard incredible things about your work, especially with the Morrison Industries account," Rebecca said during our first official meeting. "I'd love to understand how you approach that relationship recovery. It sounds like a masterclass in crisis management and client retention." Her genuine interest in learning from my experience was refreshing and helped me separate my anger about the process from my professional relationship with her. She hadn't been part of the deception. She'd simply been the beneficiary of it. Over the following months, Rebecca and I developed a productive working relationship that actually enhanced both of our capabilities. She brought strategic frameworks and analytical tools that helped me think more systematically about campaign development, while I provided insights into client psychology and company culture that helped her avoid common pitfalls. The quarterly check-ins with Jennifer and Marcus proved to be more valuable than I'd expected. Instead of generic performance reviews, these became focused conversations about specific skills I wanted to develop and concrete steps to build them. They arranged for me to attend the Pacific Northwest Marketing Summit in Portland, where I networked with senior marketing professionals from across the region and learned about emerging trends in digital marketing. They also connected me with Patricia Collins at Morrison Industries, who became an informal mentor. Patricia had risen from coordinator to VP of marketing over a 12-year career, and she provided practical advice about navigating corporate politics, building strategic thinking skills, and positioning myself for advancement. "The most important thing I learned," Patricia told me over coffee at a downtown Seattle cafe, "is that loyalty to a company should never come at the expense of loyalty to yourself. Companies are made up of people, and people make mistakes. The question is whether they're willing to learn from those mistakes and do better." Her words resonated deeply with my recent experience. Pinnacle had made significant mistakes in how they'd handled my situation, but they'd also been willing to acknowledge those mistakes and take concrete steps to address them. That willingness to change seemed more valuable than finding a perfect company that had never made mistakes. 6 months after our confrontation in Jennifer's office, an opportunity arose that tested everyone's commitment to the new dynamic we'd established. The Director of Digital Strategy position opened up when our current director decided to relocate to Austin to be closer to family. This time, the process was completely transparent. Jennifer scheduled a meeting with me the day the position became available, explaining the role requirements, the timeline for filling it, and the internal and external candidates they planned to consider. Marcus provided specific feedback about skills I'd need to develop and experiences that would strengthen my candidacy. "I want to be completely honest with you, Sarah," Jennifer said during our meeting. This role requires someone who can manage a team of 8 people, interface directly with C-level executives at our largest clients, and oversee an annual budget of $2.3 million. Based on your growth over the past 6 months and the leadership you've shown on the Morrison and Cascade accounts, I think you're a strong candidate. But you'll also be competing against external candidates with more management experience. The honesty was refreshing, even though it meant acknowledging that I might not get the position. At least this rejection, if it came, would be based on transparent criteria rather than predetermined decisions. I spent the next month preparing for the opportunity with the same strategic approach I'd used to confront the original deception. I enrolled in a leadership development course offered by the University of Washington's Business School. I requested opportunities to manage larger teams on current projects, successfully leading a 5-person team on a campaign for a regional technology company that exceeded all performance metrics. Most importantly, I prepared thoroughly for the interview process, developing detailed presentations about my vision for the department, specific strategies for team development, and innovative approaches to client relationship management that leveraged both my established relationships and my growing strategic capabilities. The interview process included presentations to the executive team, behavioral interviews with HR, and a practical exercise where I had to develop a comprehensive marketing strategy for a hypothetical client. It was challenging and thorough, but it felt fair in a way that my previous interview experience had not. When Jennifer called me into her office 2 weeks later, I felt nervous but not anxious. Whatever the outcome, I knew I'd been given a genuine opportunity to compete. "Sarah, I'm pleased to offer you the Director of Digital Strategy position," she said, her smile genuine rather than professional. "The executive team was impressed by your strategic thinking, your leadership potential, and your deep understanding of our client relationships. Your starting salary will be $95,000, with quarterly bonuses based on department performance metrics." The moment felt surreal after everything that had happened. 9 months earlier, I'd been told I wasn't ready for a senior position at $85,000. Now I was being offered a director-level role at $95,000, with greater responsibilities and growth potential than I'd ever imagined. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. "I'm excited about the opportunity and the challenges ahead." As I sat in what would soon be my new office, a corner space with windows overlooking both Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains, I reflected on everything that had happened since that devastating rejection meeting. The discovery of those emails had been crushing at the time, but it had also been exactly what I needed to advocate for myself in a way I never had before. I'd learned that difficult conversations, while uncomfortable, are sometimes the most necessary ones. That standing up for yourself doesn't have to mean burning bridges or creating enemies, and that companies, like people, can change when confronted with their mistakes in a constructive way. More importantly, I'd learned about my own capabilities and worth. The experience had taught me to advocate for myself with the same energy and strategy I brought to advocating for clients and projects. It had shown me that loyalty to an employer should be balanced with loyalty to my own professional growth and financial well-being. David knocked on my new office door, holding 2 cups of coffee from our favorite shop downstairs. "Got a minute for your old cubicle neighbor?" "Always," I said, gesturing for him to sit down in one of the comfortable chairs I'd arranged near the windows. The afternoon sun was streaming through the glass, casting warm light across the polished concrete floors. "So, Director Chen," he said with a grin, "any advice for someone who's thinking about applying for the senior marketing manager position you're vacating?" I laughed, remembering my own eagerness and anxiety from what felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than a year. "Be prepared to work hard, be honest about your capabilities, and never be afraid to ask for what you deserve." "That's it?" "Well, one more thing," I said, looking out at the Seattle skyline where the late afternoon light was reflecting off the glass towers of downtown. Sometimes the worst rejections turn out to be the best redirections. Sometimes what feels like a closed door is actually just the universe pushing you toward a door you didn't even know existed. David raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "To unexpected doors, then." "To unexpected doors," I agreed, clicking my cup against his. Outside my new office windows, a ferry was crossing Elliott Bay, carrying commuters home to the islands. The Olympic Mountains were visible in the distance, their peaks touched with snow even in late spring. For the first time in months, Seattle looked absolutely beautiful, not just despite the complexity of my journey, but because of it. That evening, as I walked through downtown Seattle toward my Queen Anne apartment, I stopped at Pike Place Market to buy flowers for my new office. The market was bustling with its usual energy. Vendors calling out their specials, tourists taking photos, locals picking up dinner ingredients. I chose a bouquet of local flowers, Pacific Northwest dahlias, Seattle-grown roses, and ferns from the Olympic Peninsula. They represented something important to me, beauty that had grown from local soil, thriving despite the region's famous rain and challenging growing conditions. As I arranged the flowers in a vase the next morning, placing them where they'd catch the early light from my office windows, I thought about how much had changed since that crushing rejection meeting. I'd gone from feeling undervalued and deceived to feeling empowered and optimistic about my future. The experience had taught me that professional growth sometimes requires uncomfortable conversations, strategic thinking, and the courage to advocate for yourself even when it feels risky. But more than anything, it had taught me that I was capable of far more than I'd ever imagined, not just professionally, but personally. 6 months into my new role as Director of Digital Strategy, I received a LinkedIn message that made me smile. It was from a young marketing coordinator at a competing firm, asking for advice about career development and workplace challenges. "I've heard great things about your leadership and your approach to professional growth," she wrote. "Would you be willing to share any insights about advocating for yourself in the workplace?" I scheduled a coffee meeting with her the following week, remembering how valuable Patricia Collins' mentorship had been during my own challenging period. As we sat in the same Capitol Hill coffee shop where I'd spent that weekend planning my confrontation with Jennifer and Marcus, I shared the most important lessons I'd learned. "The hardest part," I told her, "is recognizing that your career is ultimately your responsibility. Companies and managers can provide opportunities and support, but they can't value you more than you value yourself. Sometimes that means having difficult conversations. Sometimes it means taking calculated risks, but it always means being honest about what you deserve and being willing to ask for it." She took notes on her phone, asking thoughtful questions about strategy, timing, and professional relationships. Watching her process, the information reminded me of my own journey and how much I'd grown not just professionally, but personally. As I walked back to my office that afternoon, passing the familiar sights of downtown Seattle, the original Starbucks, the waterfront, the iconic Pike Place Market sign, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had happened, even the painful parts. The rejection that had felt so devastating had ultimately led to opportunities I never could have imagined. The deception that had made me question everything had taught me to trust my instincts and advocate for myself. The confrontation that had terrified me had shown me my own strength and capabilities. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to your career is discovering that you're stronger than you ever imagined, more valuable than you've been told, and more capable of change than you ever believed possible. And sometimes, the email you were never supposed to see turns out to be exactly the information you needed to transform your entire professional life.